equal to 5 times the population of Kentucky. And although I'm not aware personally, it's quite possible that some of our fellow Rotarians have lost their jobs or that their sources of income have been negatively impacted. And so I know I speak for our entire club that I say that you, our fellow Kentuckians and our fellow Americans, are in all of our prayers. But in spite of this horrible disease, we've seen many things which have brought out the best in our country. Many groups have stepped forward to provide assistance to the most vulnerable in our society, particularly the elderly, who are the most susceptible to contracting COVID-19. In public, people are making a conscious effort to socially distance themselves from others, and only a few people have been selfish by continuing to meet in groups. Our own Governor Andy Beshear now ranks first out of 50 governors for how he has handled the COVID-19 virus here at home. And I think Governor Beshear's calm demeanor, empathy, and leadership has helped to keep our overall numbers on the low side. Finally, just an FYI for everybody, our club board of directors will be meeting on Monday via Zoom, of course, and for our regular meeting. And one of our agenda items will be a discussion of what our club can do here in Louisville to reach out and help those who have been impacted by the virus. So you'll hear a little bit more about that later on. So now let's pivot for some regular announcements. It's been a while since we've had any. First of all, we have some birthdays to the following Rotarians who are celebrating a birthday. Today on April 16th, Ken Middleton, William Herzl. On April 17th, Chandra Gordon. On the 19th, Todd Spencer. Barry Barker on April 20th. On April 22nd, Bill Kelly. And also on April 22nd, Max Bridges and Gordon Reagan. So a happy birthday to everybody this week. Now, everybody should have received an email last week regarding nominations for the Lifetime Service Award. If you know of a Rotarian that fits the criteria, please fill out a nomination form and submit that to the Rotary office by May 7th. And also at this time, we are still asking that you save the dates for our summer events. Depending on the CDC guidelines, as well as directives from Governor Beshear, we will make a decision as to whether these events will be held as scheduled, postponed, or canceled. So just watch email for updates on these events. May 21st, we have a business synergy event at the new Louisville City Football Club Stadium. This is an evening event, and it will take the place of our lunch meeting that day. So assuming that we're all out and about and the stadium can host us, that will take place. But again, keep an eye on your email for the update. June the 7th is a Rotary Summer Social at Craig Sherman's home. July, we don't have the exact date yet, but in July, we're planning a Rotary event at the Louisville Zoo. And then on August the 8th, the Rotary game night at Louisville City Football Club versus St. Louis Football Club. All of those will be a lot of fun. I also have 4 announcements related to Rotary International or Rotary District 6710. First,
how to do all this stuff.
First, Rotary International is soliciting.
See this videos up here. It works, but
we need to mute, please, because it impacts us all there. Okay, Rotary International is soliciting qualified candidates for the 2021-2022 Rotary Peace Fellowship. Individual candidates that are interested have until May 31st to submit applications to District 6710. Interested candidates, excuse me, should contact the following email address: Rotary Peace Centers, that's plural, Rotary Peace Centers @rotary.org for more information. Second, the Rotary District Convention has been rescheduled and will be held in Bowling Green on June 26th and June 27th. So it will not be held in May, it will be in June 26th, June 27th. Third, the Rotary District Award submissions are due to be received no later than May the 8th. Fourth, memorandums of understanding for any Rotary District grants are due no later than June 30th. So if any committees are working on a grant application, you'll need to have all your work done June 30th. If you need any more information on any of these district issues, please visit the Rotary District 6710 website, which is rotarydistrict6710.org. Finally, our Rotary Day at the Downs has been rescheduled for Wednesday, September 2nd. If you were already registered, you do not need to re-register. Your registration has been moved to the new date. And registration has been reopened for those who still need to register. If you have any questions, please contact Alyssa in the Rotary office. Okay, And our next virtual meeting will be next Thursday. That's a week from today, April 23rd, beginning at 12 p.m. Excuse me. Our speaker will be Amy Wilson, who is a pharmacist, nutrition coach, and fitness trainer who will be speaking on the issue of wellness during this period of sheltering in place. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I've probably put on a couple of pounds since we all started staying home. So I'll look forward to hearing what he has to say. So, and now for the main event, I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker today. But before I do, I'd like to invite any Rotarians today who may have any questions about what our speaker presents. If you would, please submit your questions via Zoom chat room. That's the icon at the lower center of the screen. If you'll include your name and question when we're finished, or when the speaker is finished, I'll ask as many questions as we can fit in so that we'll all conclude by 1 p.m. So let me do the introduction, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Dr. Michael Saag, who is a native of Louisville, graduate from Ballard High School back in 1973. Dr. Saag received his undergraduate degree in chemistry from Tulane University. He also received his medical degree from the University of Louisville School of Medicine. Dr. Saag completed his residency in internal medicine and also fellowship training in infectious disease and molecular virology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, better known as UAB. Dr. Saag holds the Jim Straley Chair in AIDS Research. He is the director of the Division of Infectious Disease and is also the director of the William C. Gorgas Center for Geographic Medicine and director of the Center for AIDS Research, all at UAB. As you can tell, Dr. Saag is a renowned physician and researcher when it comes to AIDS, and he frequently lectures on this subject all around the world. In 2009, Dr. Saag was elected chairman of the HIV Medicine Association of the Infectious Disease Society of America. And in 2019, Dr. Saag began a term on the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. He is a friend and colleague of Dr. Anthony Fauci from the NIH, who has become a superstar, who of course is deeply involved with the coronavirus issue. And it's also important to note something here that directly relates to Dr. Saag's presentation today. He himself just recently recovered from COVID-19. So not only does he know a lot about this disease, he actually contracted it, and he can speak on a firsthand basis about it. And then lastly, I'm pleased to note that Dr. Saag is also a fellow Rotarian. He's a member of the Rotary Club of Birmingham, which is their downtown club, and also happens to be the largest Rotary Club in the world. So Dr. Saag, on behalf of the Rotary Club of Louisville, welcome to our first virtual meeting, and the virtual podium is yours. Welcome.
Well, thanks so much, and it's great to be back with you. I've spoken to our Louisville Rotary in the past. I wish it was under different circumstances and I could be with you. One thing it does give me the chance to do is point out that this was my Louisville Stoneware mug when I graduated medical school in 1981, and it's still in great shape. So congratulations to Louisville Stoneware. I'm going to spend about 8 minutes reviewing the basics of COVID-19 and then open up for questions, because I think most of you know some details about this and I don't want to belabor you with a long lecture. So let me start. SARS-CoV-2, which is a virus that causes COVID-19, is a novel coronavirus. Coronaviruses mostly live in the animal community. They sometimes transfer over to humans. The way you would most know a coronavirus is the common cold. So not every coronavirus is as evil as the one that we're currently encountering. Oftentimes, viruses or bacteria or parasites travel from the animal kingdom into the human kingdom, if you will. And those are called zoonotic infections. And this is a classic zoonotic infection, one that was probably in a bat reservoir for quite a while, and then probably transitioned over to civet cats or maybe something like that. And in the open wet markets in Wuhan, China, transition from animal to human. Now, just because it enters the animal kingdom, if you will, from the humans from the animal kingdom, doesn't mean it's necessarily going to create a pandemic. What is required for that is human-to-human transmission. And this virus does that very efficiently and very effectively. In fact, it's probably more contagious than the common cold, which is why you see it spreading so much and why we have to go to stay-at-home restrictions to prevent its transmission in our communities right now. The virus, once it enters into a host, a human, in this particular situation, since it's a virus that none of us have ever seen before, there's no one in the world who has natural immunity to this. So every time someone becomes infected with it, including myself, which I'll talk about in a second, our natural immune response has to start from scratch. It's precisely that immune response that causes the symptoms of coronavirus or COVID-19. I'll digress for a second and tell you about my story, but I think it's fairly typical. Most people who get infected with coronavirus have no symptoms whatsoever. That's estimated to be about 20%, or mild symptoms. In my case, I had moderate symptoms that almost put me in the hospital. And only about 20% of people who get COVID-19 get sick enough to go to the hospital. And a portion of those folks go on to respirators, ventilators, and then a fraction of those individuals, as you know well, die. In my situation, my first symptoms were weakness, not feeling real good, headache, and maybe a little bit of cough. Unlike the flu that hits you all of a sudden and just kind of knocks you out all at once, this virus is more insidious. And what's happening during those first 4 to 5 days is the virus is just simply replicating. It binds to receptors in the respiratory tract, nasopharynx, lung, and it enters in through a receptor called ACE2, enters into the respiratory cells, converts that cell into a viral factory, spits out probably billions of viruses a day, and just keeps doing that for as long as the body will let it. By about day 5 or 6, the immune system starts to say, whoa, there's something going on here, and starts to respond. That's usually when the symptoms intensify and worsen, and that's certainly what happened with me. On day 5, I thought I was over it. I felt great that morning, but by the afternoon, I got hit with tremendous body aches, muscle aches, fever, about 102, and really felt awful. That night and every night for the next 8 nights, I would just deteriorate. I would have confused thinking. I lost my sense of smell, which is kind of pathognomonic, meaning it's a sure sign that someone has COVID-19, when they lose their sense of smell. In the middle of the night, I would sit there and wonder, because I'm a physician, am I going to get worse? That everybody thinks that, but in my head, I'm thinking, I know what the body's doing right now to fight this. And that was a horror story for me, because I kept thinking that my chemicals from the immune system were going to get me so sick that I would get short of breath and have to go to the hospital. Fortunately, I never did. But of course, in the middle of the night, I couldn't tell that. When I woke up the next morning, I felt pretty good. And I thought, okay, I'm done with this. And then cruelly and relentlessly the next night, boom, it was back. It was very much like Groundhog Day. After about 8 days of this misery, it finally went away. And it took about a week longer for me to recover, in the sense of finishing out the cough and getting my energy back. And about a week ago, Monday, I returned to work. As you can see from my scrubs and my white coat, after this meeting is over, I'm headed over to the outpatient clinic, where we have a COVID-19 clinic for outpatients, and I volunteered immediately to participate in that. Let me transition now to the thing that's on most people's mind, and that is, how long do we have to do this stay at home? Let me give a tip of the hat to your governor. You've already mentioned him in the introduction, but let me say how prescient your governor was and how much he saved Kentucky a lot of misery. There's a great comparison about how Kentucky responded on March 6th, when a state of emergency was declared, and then comparing that, for example, to Tennessee, that didn't make that change until about 10 days later. Just that 10-day period meant that Kentucky's cases have stayed relatively flat, but Tennessee's cases have spiked up. They're now under control because Tennessee did follow suit, but it was only about 2 weeks of a delay. And that 2 weeks was critical, because every day that we delay implementation of stay-at-home and social distancing, up to 40% new transmissions occur each 24-hour period. So for those of you who want to think back to math somewhere in high school or college, that's called exponential growth. And that's what those spikes are about. You see it in New York. You see it somewhat in Tennessee. You see it for sure in Detroit, Michigan, and Chicago, and New Orleans, for example. In our state, in our county, our county health officer was also, like Governor Beshear, very prescient and called a stay-at-home order well before it hit here. So we've been fortunate in that we haven't had the overwhelming numbers. So clearly, stay-at-home orders works. And now the question, when can we get out of this? Well, that answer is kind of complicated. I think the first thing we can say is that simply stopping stay-at-home with no specific plan is a recipe for disaster, mostly because there's no difference between March 1st and pick a date, June 1st, if we simply stop, because the virus is still there and there's a whole bevy of susceptible people who have not had the infection who are still out there that's just basically cannon fodder for the virus. So all we will have done if we have stay at home from point A to point B, we will suppress it, flatten the curve for that time. But as soon as you release, it's like back to the future. You're going right back to where we were on March 1st and everything would pick up again. So what should we do? It's not a question of when to stop the stay at home. The big question is how. Here's my suggestion. We should treat this like we do tuberculosis. Somebody gets diagnosed with TB, they get quarantined, and then treatments are prescribed for them as best we can for COVID. But then everyone who's been in the orbit, contact closely with the TB patient, gets tested. And if they test positive, they also are quarantined and treated as best we can. And if they test negative, they're put in isolation for about 10 to 14 days to see if they will develop symptoms. In other words, they have a stay-at-home order for them. If they all test negative after 10 to 14 days, then they can go back to their business. If they test positive in the sense of an antibody, meaning that they've had a prior infection, it's okay for them to then be released. There aren't that many of us. I now am one of those people. I've been infected and I have antibody or immunity, but that's what we have to do. So you can hear in the sub-background of this story that the whole key to releasing the stay-at-home restrictions is case contact tracing, and that implies readily available large numbers of accurate tests. If we do not have those, we won't be able to come out of stay at home until one of two things happens. We get a vaccine, that's 12 months from now, or we get an effective therapy, and that's uncertain right now. We don't have a known effective therapy at the moment. I'll finish with that. So I hope that's clear. When we hear discussions about, well, X date, we're going to stop stay at home, that's okay to say that, but it's not going to work unless there's a plan. And most experts, public health experts, infectious disease experts, will clearly tell you that what I've said is public health 101. Simple, straightforward, not new. It's what we do for every type of infectious disease for which we don't have either effective therapy or that's very contagious like COVID-19 is. Let me finish with therapy and then I'll open it up to questions. Right now, there's a few therapies that have been touted, none of which are proven to be safe or effective just yet. I'll start with hydroxychloroquine. It's a drug that's been around for a long time. You might have heard of the drug known as Plaquenil. That's the same drug. Now, there were reports out of France that said Plaquenil plus Azithro, or you think about that with a Z-Pak, when given together, dropped the amount of virus in the nasopharynx dramatically compared to those who didn't get it. If those folks who got Plaquenil alone, they were somewhere in the middle. So no treatment, Plaquenil alone, Plaquenil and azithro, looked very promising. Here's the problem. It was only used in a total of 20 patients, and only 6 patients got the two therapies together. Now let's go back to me. When I was waking up in the morning after one of those horrible nights, that study was just released. I called 10 experts, colleagues, and said, what would you do? They said, try it, it won't hurt you any. So I did. Can I say it made a difference? Well, I'm alive, but I couldn't feel a difference. Those of you who've had the flu and took Tamiflu early, you know what it felt like. You sort of, within 12 to 24 hours, you could tell you were better. That didn't happen with the Plaquenil and azithro for me. About a week after I finished treatment, studies started coming out that said those two drugs together can make EKG heart rhythm abnormalities. And the bad news of that is that if it gets bad enough, you have sudden death. Your heart goes into ventricular arrhythmia and you die. So we don't know yet what the frequency of that is. We don't know yet if the treatment even works. And there's been several studies out of France and China that really that show that's not really doing that much. So I'm on the fence about Plaquenil. One drug, though, that I think is worth keeping our eye on is a drug called remdesivir. This drug was developed in collaboration with colleagues of mine here at UAB and a number of other institutions in the Southeast, including North Carolina. This drug was developed in conjunction with Gilead Sciences, and they were looking for drugs that could work against Ebola around 2015, 2016, with money from the National Institutes of Health. In fact, the institute that Tony Fauci runs. And they were looking for a treatment for Ebola, and they tried a lot of different drugs. They didn't really find that many drugs for Ebola, but this particular drug, which is a derivative of an HIV drug called tenofovir, several changes to it, but that's where the drug comes from. And it stops the replication of the virus in test tubes. And they also checked it against SARS in an animal model, the first SARS from 2003, and MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, that was developed in about 2012 or so. And it seemed to work in the animal model. So that drug is currently under investigation in randomized trials throughout the world, actually. We have a study here, there likely is one in Louisville. So I think those are the things that we can keep our eye on. There was a report on April 10th in the New England Journal of Medicine that looked at about 53 people who got remdesivir, and these people mostly had advanced disease. And there was a reasonable response, but it was non-comparative. The drug seems safe. There's a few people who got kidney trouble, but it's hard to say if that was from the drug or from the virus, which can cause kidney failure. So we need to wait another month or two to know whether that's going to work or not. But if it does, I can see a day where we would use that early on in infection and maybe prevent symptoms. Well, I see we're 30 minutes into our meeting, so I think I'll stop there. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, and I'll answer them as quickly and efficiently as I can. So I'll turn it back over to Luke, and we can go from there.
Very good, Dr. Saag. Thank you very much. That's a terrific presentation, very, very informative. We do have some questions here, and I'm going to read them, and if you could respond, that would be wonderful.
Sure.
This first question is from Cynthia Miles Brown, and her question is, what types of things did you do at home when you had COVID-19 to help you clear congestion, et cetera, so that you didn't end up having to go to the hospital? Any tricks of the trade, so to speak?
Mostly what I had was a good dose of luck. There's not a whole lot we can do to prevent this thing from going on in the lungs and causing respiratory failure. So I just got lucky. But what I did, I can't take Tylenol because I've got an allergy. So I took modest doses of naproxen, which is Aleve. And I took some Mucinex just because I thought it might help loosen things up. And every now and then I took a little inhaled albuterol. But I was, to be honest, just flailing at this and hoping that enough time would go by that I wouldn't get sick. Rest, very important. Well, I found that if I worked too much in the morning when I felt okay, I had a terrible night that night. So I'd say take it easy. Fluids and getting up out of bed, taking deep breaths, that type of thing helps. But really, to be very honest, luck.
Okay, thank you. This next question is from Tom Crimmins. Tom's question is this: Kentucky has done well in controlling the spread of COVID, but apparently San Francisco and maybe California in general has done a little bit better. From your perspective, what would you think that they did that perhaps was better than what we've done here?
I don't think they've done better than Kentucky. Kentucky's done about as well as any state. California is a bigger state, of course, but California shut down all of their commerce at a good time compared to New York, that was about probably 10 days too late. And not like New Orleans, that was way late. They sort of probably had a dose of spread of coronavirus during Mardi Gras, which was mid-February, and they just got walloped by it. But California's done well, Oregon's done well, Seattle and all of Washington State got behind the 8 ball because of a nursing home outbreak, and also a cruise ship, I believe, came in. But the bottom line is the states like Kentucky did great. Now the question is, what do you do next?
Okay, that's good to hear that we're ahead of the curve, so to speak, relative to the other states. This next question is from a friend of yours, a fellow Ballard graduate, Ken Grossman, and Ken was very instrumental in helping facilitate your appearance today, and we appreciate that. Ken's question is this: when can we resume public gatherings such as business meetings like Rotary or sporting events, church? When do you think we can reopen those kinds of events again?
Well, like most Ballard graduates, Ken asks good questions. I will say that I think is the last thing that's going to return, I'm afraid. Let me tell you what I hope happens and what I think will happen in states that are informed and enlightened like Kentucky. What will happen is they'll ramp up testing, and they'll introduce case contact tracing that will isolate people. They'll also, like New York is doing, probably issue, if not an order, a strong suggestion that people wear masks anywhere they go in public, at least until this is passed. So that's going to be the start. If you think carefully about what case contact tracing means, it's looking for contacts in a very small circle. So that means we have to restrict our engagement with people as much as possible, even as we're going back to work, even as we're expanding things. So workplaces will probably open up when they have to first. That'll be followed by perhaps some other activities like kids playing in a park next. I'm not sure when schools will come back, but they'll probably be the next because the kids are least exposed, but it's a little dangerous, to be honest, because they can bring it home if they pick it up and they might not have symptoms. By the way, I should tell you this. Some data came out yesterday that showed that around 2.7 days before the symptoms start, people are shedding virus and infecting others. The highest peak of shedding virus is about a half a day before someone gets symptoms. So someone can be out in public and say, I feel fine. And then 8 hours later, they get sick. If you were around them in that 8-hour period before they got sick, you were heavily exposed to the virus. That's what happened to me, in fact. So coming back to Ken's question, I think, unfortunately, large social gatherings are going to be the last thing to come back. And so as I'm listening, I was cringing a little bit because I was feeling your pain when you talked about postponing the racetrack to September. I don't think it's going to happen. Football season may happen. That's important in my neck of the woods now. I was a basketball fan when I was in Louisville all the time. Now I'm more of a football fan, but football will probably return without fans in the stands. It's going to be weird. But the game will be played. The teams will be carefully monitored. You can do case contact tracing in that setting. But large social gatherings won't come back until one of three things happens. One, we have a vaccine. That'll be about 12 months from now. I think we will have one. Two, we might have a treatment. So let's say, for example, this remdesivir hits. That drug's given IV for 5 days, so it's not going to be easy to take. It won't be like Tamiflu in a pill. But I think if we can start treating people early, get the virus suppressed, then we'll be more comfortable expanding so that if people do get sick, they'll be able to be treated, suppress the virus, provide air support for the infantry, which is what I call it. In other words, suppress the virus so the immune system, the infantry, can take over without having to go haywire and cause a lot of symptoms. Or a third thing is that we simply just outlast this, but that's going to be a year or two from now. So we can't tolerate that. We're going to have to get back to work. We're going to have to get back to some normal activities. We got to get our economy back to some degree, but that's going to require testing, testing, testing. You're going to see that everywhere. And anything short of that is doomed to fail, in my opinion.
Okay. Yes, I can feel your pain with the Crimson Tide that if football shuts down in Alabama, I know we've got a problem.
Yeah,
And
big time.
it was same with March Madness up here.
Mm-hmm.
Next couple of questions on testing. The first one is from Steve Rungworth, and the question is, can you speak to how accurate our current tests are, and how many false positives are there, and how many false negatives?
Well, there's two different types of tests. Let's start with the viral test. So that's the swab that usually goes to the back of the nose, and if you're not feeling pain when they do it, that's not a good sample. It's got to go way back, and you got to twirl it around and make sure your eyes water. Then I prefer that they follow up with a throat swab and put it in the same thing, but that's not always done. When it's done properly, there are false negatives up to 30% of the time, 30%. So I have plenty of people who I've taken care of who had the test when they had symptoms. The symptoms are classic, and their test is negative. I don't care. They had COVID, had to have. It's the only thing that could have caused their symptoms. The second thing is, and as far as false positives, not many of those. So the sensitivity is off a little bit. The specificity is very, very good. The second type of test, which will become equally, if not maybe even more so important, is the antibody test. Let's talk about that for a second. Antibody tests are looking at the immune system's response to the virus. So let's talk about me. When I had my first symptoms, 2 days later, I got a nasal swab. It hurt, but it was positive, so I knew I had it. On that day, I had blood drawn for research purposes. I went back 3 weeks later, had blood drawn again for research purposes, sent it to colleagues I'd worked with at UAB who are now at UPenn, and they ran antibody tests, highly positive, strongly positive. They've gone on to ask the question, do those antibodies neutralize the virus? In other words, when it comes into contact with the virus in a tissue culture, does it prevent the virus from infecting cells? Good news is, yes, it does, to quite a high titer. Great. That's not only good news for me, it's also good news for all of us, because that implies that immunity, at least in my case, is likely to be protective if I get exposed to the virus again. Does that mean I run around and not wear equipment? Of course not. I'm not that confident or that stupid, but I do wear protective equipment, but I do feel like I have some degree of protection if I got exposed to low doses of virus. The reason why it's important for all of us is that if that holds true for most people who have infection, it means that they're resistant to a challenge for a second infection. Why is that important? Because it implies that a vaccine can work. Take the converse. If, let's say, I or somebody who's had infection gets challenged and they get infected again with a different strain, or just they get exposed and reinfected and again, then that means our immunity is not protective. If natural infection doesn't protect, there's no hope for a vaccine. Zero. So I think, and like a lot of folks, Fauci and others, we all are leaning towards the idea that immunity is protective. You get infected once, and just like measles and mumps, rubella, a lot of polio, once you've been exposed to the vaccine, or once you've been infected, you're protected. And I think that's what's going to happen with this.
Okay, excellent. Our next question also deals with testing, and it's from Julie Skoski. And Julie would like to know, when will antibody tests be widely available?
Sorry, I got sidetracked in my rant a second ago. So that was the second part of the earlier question. The antibody tests are not really good right now. I wouldn't get one. There's a lot of commercial companies out there that have a bad product, to be honest. I'm waiting for my institution to adopt one of the antibody tests. They're in the process of that now, testing it thoroughly to make sure it's sensitive and specific. And once I'm confident, then I'll start sending people to get it done. In my opinion, those antibody tests are going to be important, because if immunity can happen, we can start testing large numbers of the population, and we can see how many people might have been infected and didn't even know it, had one of those asymptomatic infections. And we could also start maybe thinking about serosorting. That means those who are testing positive by antibody, we can almost give them a certificate of sorts, not really, but a notion that they're going to be likely protected, and they don't have to, they can do more integration into society. Those of us who don't have the antibody yet have got to be a little bit more careful. So at least that'll free up some people in society to become active. Before we do that, we have to have the test available, and we got to know a little bit more about what I was just talking about in terms of, is that immunity truly protective? We need to figure that out.
Okay, terrific. Next question is from Doug Myers, and Doug's question is this: are people with autoimmune diseases more or less or equally vulnerable to COVID-19?
Did you go to Ballard? That's a great question.
I don't know if it did.
I'm just kidding. So here's the answer: is unknown. I can argue it both ways. If somebody has autoimmunity, it means their immune system's typically revved up. So people that have lupus or other types of disorders, that their immune system starts attacking tissues in the body. Now, often those folks are put on biologic agents to calm down the immune system. In the case of COVID, when someone's infected, it's precisely the immune system response that causes all the symptoms. And it's a hyper-aggressive immune system response that makes people really sick, starts attacking the lung. It's attacking the virus, but the lung becomes friendly fire, if you will. It's a victim of the immune system going haywire. And it's that immune system response that puts people in the hospital and on ventilators and ultimately may kill someone. So someone who has a hyperactive immune response, an autoimmune disease, might be at higher risk. But if they're on immunosuppressive agents, theoretically, it may protect them against some of the worst symptoms. Do I know that for a fact? I don't. That's a speculation. I want to make that clear. But my sense is that somebody on a biologic, somebody who's already on a certain type of immune suppressant, might have a little bit of a heads up or leg up on not getting quite as sick. It may take them longer to clear the virus, but as far as symptom goes, they may be okay.
Okay, excellent. Next question is from Steve Jester, and Steve's question is, what about the new information about COVID patients sleeping on their stomachs? That's kind of interesting.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not COVID specific. That's something that ICU docs probably over the last decade, and certainly the last 5 years, have discovered that when somebody goes into respiratory failure, they do better when you put them on their stomach. Prone is what it's called. Proning. It's actually a verb. You prone the patient, and they get better oxygenation when they're on a ventilator. So what people have said is that, well, if it's better for somebody in a hospital on a ventilator, maybe it's better for people at home. So I would take that maybe with a grain of salt in that. If somebody's at home like I was and I wasn't having respiratory distress, I probably didn't need to prone. Doesn't mean I hurt myself, but really the concept of proning is to improve oxygenation for those who are in trouble.
All right, terrific. This is obviously your knowledge of all of this and your command of the subject has really gotten the interest of a lot of our members. You have time for 3 or 4 more questions?
I'll go as long as you want.
Okay, wonderful. This next question is from Delene Taylor, and Delene asks, have you seen any benefits either from prevention or minimizing symptoms from large doses of vitamin C or other supplements?
I haven't. Vitamin C has been touted as a helpful for the common cold. I mean, you know the data, you guys know it as well as I. I don't think it will necessarily help. Will it hurt? Probably not. It's like any other vitamin. If you take too much of it, it pretty much just comes out in your urine and you've just literally urinated your money away. But I don't think it would hurt, but I don't think it's going to help too much.
Okay, this next question is from a retired circuit court judge, so be careful how you answer it, from Fred Cannon.
I'll file a brief.
Okay, yeah, file a brief. Fred wants to know, when we start to open back up, who are we going to test, and what kind of workforce will we need to do all that tracking and surveillance necessary?
It's a good question. So it's going to be multi-pronged. So the first and foremost, the priorities go to the people with symptoms, and we test them, confirm a diagnosis, and then we find all the people in their immediate circle, literally, and you test them as well. Isolate, quarantine as you need to. A second group of people might be people returning to work. And so we might do some just random testing among people returning to work. We might make it mandatory if the workplace is kind of crowded. We will let people back. We'll try to maintain social distancing. I prefer everybody wear a mask. Anybody who has symptom, report it immediately. It's an obligation. It's a patriotic duty to protect the people around you, to report your symptoms. And the employer has to make sure that they do not penalize people who are sick. They should get paid while they're sick at home. Otherwise, people will be inhibited from telling that they have symptoms. So that's a second prong, would be people at work in a workplace environment that's safe to go back. The third area would be what I would call random testing. And that's just, you literally select people at random, you test them for antibody predominantly. You can screen them for symptoms as you go in. But what we're looking for there is the degree of penetration of the virus into the local population. And this is going to vary, for example, in Kentucky, county by county, or maybe even community by community, depending on the penetration of the virus into that township or that small town or that larger city. So we need to do that across the state. And I'm confident that your state health officers know all this stuff. This is, again, Public Health 101.
Very, very good. Next question is from Kurt Jacobs, and Kurt would like to know, is it possible COVID-19 was already well established into the U.S. population before we started social distancing around mid-March of this year?
Absolutely. This virus was in the United States probably going back into January, just at a slow level. Remember, it's about 10 days, could be as short as 5 or 2, but around 10 days between the time someone gets infected and the time that they start exhibiting symptoms. Could be shorter. But the fact is, we didn't start seeing the cases show up until early February. Remember, we had a few cases. Then we saw a lot out of the state of Washington. But while that was happening, it's percolating everywhere. And Mardi Gras, like I mentioned, was a big, big event that a lot of people got infected, and they started showing up the 1st of March. So no question, this virus is around, probably entering into late January and for sure in February.
Okay. Next question is from Melissa Marvel, and Melissa asks, if someone believes, excuse me, if someone believes they have had COVID-19 and they've recovered, yet have not been tested, what might one do if they would like to donate blood or plasma?
Well, first thing to do is to get the antibody test once it's reliable and available. That will confirm that you had the infection. Let's say you had the infection. Does it mean for sure you're going to have an antibody response? Not necessarily. If somebody had mild infection or asymptomatic, they might have skirted by without developing an immune response. But I think it's safe to say that the majority, if not almost all people who had the true infection, will have an antibody response that will be easily measured in a bloodstream, much like you do an HIV test or a hepatitis C screening test. That's the same type of test where you're looking for antibody against the pathogen. Now, once you have a test that's positive, it's possible that you could donate. And I think what she's alluding to is a notion of using somebody's plasma. So I could donate now, and they could infuse my plasma into a sick patient in the hospital and maybe help them. I think that's feasible. I think we might be doing it more and more. But what we really need is a drug therapy and ultimately a vaccine to really have widespread use.
Okay, terrific. We're going to wrap up with two more questions. And again, really appreciate your time and a wonderful presentation. This next question is from our incoming president, Julie Schmidt. Julie would like to know, how long do you have the virus before you're not contagious?
Another Ballard graduate. Okay, so here's how it works. Get the infection, 4 to 5 days to get symptoms. Then you're symptomatic for, let's say on average, 14 days. It's estimated that after 3 days, once symptoms have gone away, the vast majority of people are no longer shedding virus. In fact, studies out of Germany showed that 7 days into the illness, they couldn't culture the virus anymore. It's a culturable virus that's the one that's actively transmitted. You can see evidence of RNA, the genetic material of the virus, all the way out to 14, sometimes 30 days. The question is that virus infectious? And most people believe it's not. So the rule of thumb, after symptoms are over, count 3 days of feeling normal, and then you're unlikely to be infectious anymore, and you can re-enter into your household like Chris Cuomo's about to do.
Okay, excellent. This last question, I think, is a great one to end on. This is from Dan Hartledge. And the question is this: what is Dr. Fauci like, and how would you evaluate his navigating this issue among the thick political climate? That's a terrific question.
Yeah. I've worked with Tony Fauci since 1986. We've had laboratory collaborations. I've worked with him on policy. I currently serve on something called the Council of Scientists Review, the BSC, and what we do there, the Board of Scientific Counselors for the NIAID that he runs, and I'm a part of that reviews their entire intramural program, all the stuff that the labs associated with him, but anywhere else in the NIAID, we review every 4 years because it's congressionally mandated. I know him very well. Tony's about 79 years old now. He's as active as he was when he was 55. He's one of the smartest human beings I've met. He's not only smart, a lot of smart people in the world, he's also one of the hardest working individuals I've met. And to give you an example, when we review his lab, which is very important for them to continue to have funding over the next 4 years, he starts his entire lab, every single one of them who's going to start their presentations 9 months before the review. And they meet monthly or every other month, and the same people present until they get it right. Tony is at every single presentation and commenting on how they can improve their presentation. That's how thorough he is. That's how committed he is, how dedicated he is, and hardworking. So what he's bringing to the table for all of us at a national level, above all, is intellect, incredible knowledge of infectious diseases, pragmatism, and a political savviness that very few people in Washington have. Remember, he's been involved with presidential administrations from the middle of Ronald Reagan till now. He's worked with Democrat, Republican presidents. He's testified to Congress well over probably 200 times, and he's one of the most effective and respected scientists in Washington, D.C., and for that matter, around the world. I'm honored to be associated with him, and I hope that he's able to continue doing what he does for several more years to come.
Very, very good. Dr. Saag, thank you very, very much on behalf of our entire club. This has been one of the best presentations we've had, albeit our first virtual one. So we'll nominate you for an Emmy. How's that?
Okay, fine. And in the meanwhile, go Louisville.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
All right.
we're going to close this meeting out, and I have one additional announcement I'd like to make for the benefit of all of our Rotarians, and that is all of you should have received an email last week regarding the nominations for the Lifetime Service Award. If you know of a Rotarian that fits the criteria, and the criteria were sent out as well, please fill out a nomination form and submit it to the Rotary office no later than May the 7th. And with that, a quick reminder again, we will have our next meeting next week at the same time, 12 o'clock, and we're looking forward to it. So with that, we are adjourned.